Okay, it is 6:30, so I will call to order a meeting of the Oregon School District Board of Education. It is Monday, July 11th. We are here in the OSD Innovation Center at Oregon High School. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Bijak? Here. Ms. Garrison? Here. Dr. Lakuta? Here. Mr. LeBrun?
Here.
Mr. Pankratz?
Here.
Ms. Wright?
Here.
Ms. Flanagan?
Here, board does have a quorum. You will notice there is a space to my left. Dr. Bergstrom is under the weather this evening, so she will not be here, but I'm sure she is watching, and hopefully she is resting, and we hope you feel better soon. So just wanted to mention that. So we do have proof of notice. Katie has posted this meeting, so we are good to go there. We do have a full agenda tonight. We have our normal consent calendar, information items, and then we do have 6 action items tonight. So it will be a busy meeting. Will have our committee reports, and then our normal information items. John Tanner will do that in place of Dr. Bergstrom, and then the board will go into closed session. We will not return into open session, but we will go into closed session. So I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda. Is there a second? All right, is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 7-0. All right, moving on to the consent calendar. I will mention that we do have a meeting minutes that I will abstain from on the 13th, and I believe Anna will as well. We were both gone for that meeting. And then we do have one donation this evening. It's from Everlight Solar for $1,734.65 for the RCI outdoor green space. And then the board does have an updated staffing assignments and resignations in front of them. So I will entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar. Is there a second? All right, Katie, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Wright? Yes. Ms. Garrison? Yes. Ms. Bijak? Yes. Dr. Lakuta? Yes. Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 7-0.
One correction.
Oh, sorry.
I was absent from the last board meeting on the 27th,
Okay.
so I abstained from that approval.
Thank you for that note, Tim. Okay, moving on to information items. Do we have anyone here for public comment? Is there anyone here for public comment? One last time. Is there anyone here for public comment? Katie, is anyone registered? No. Okay, we will move on to OEA report. Is there anyone here from the OEA to report this evening? Okay, hearing none, we will move on. And then our students, because it is summer, we do not make them come to school board meetings. So we will now move on to action items. So the first action item is our 2022 and 2025 through 2025 board priorities. The board does have the purple in front of them. Since Dr. Bergstrom is not here, I think everybody had a chance to read through the supporting data. This was part of our strategic planning process as part of our May 24th board workshop, where we worked together on kind of the strengths and both opportunities for our district, and came up with these are the 5 priorities that the Board of Education has as the leadership of the district. So it is recommended the Oregon Board of Education approve these. So I will entertain a motion to get it on the floor.
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second? All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on the priorities? Okay, hearing none. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison? Yes. Ms. Bijak? Yes. Dr. Lakuta? Yes. Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Ms. Wright? Yes. Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 7-0. Thanks, everyone, for your input on that important effort. Okay, moving on to action item number 2 is the 2022-2023 academic standards, which is something the board does approve every July. And so Mr. Tanner will join us at the podium, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, this is basically a pro forma exercise. The DPI requires the school boards every year at the first board meeting of the year to approve the academic standards for the following or upcoming year. So we've gone through and revised them, and we are also required by state statute to publish them and notify parents. So they are published on the website right now. We went through and made sure that all the links were working and that they were pointing to the right things and that they were updated and correspond to what we've been working on, and they do. And then we notify, I mean, it's on the website, but we also notify parents in some of the handouts that go out during registration process and at the beginning of the school year. So we just recommend that you formally adopt them.
Okay, so this is, as John mentioned, this is part of Wisconsin statute. These are always on our website, so parents can check them at any time. So I will entertain a motion from the board. Is there a second? All right, is there any discussion? Go ahead, Tim.
John, anything of note
to bring to the table? Anything that's out of the ordinary, something new
No.
out of DPI?
No, last year we had some more major changes. This year we're in the process of adopting some of the standards, but they are fairly minor. Darcy's been working with the ELA and social studies teachers to do some shifts of standards that happened either in 2018 or 2018-19 or 19-20 that we kind of got a little behind on during COVID. But there's nothing really major to do with that. So we're doing sort of the implementation of it, but it's not a huge change.
All right, any additional questions for John? Okay, hearing none, Katie, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Dr. Lakuta?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 7-0. Thank you, John. Okay, action item number 3 is 2022-2023 food service prices. So I will turn that over to Mr. Wyland.
Thank you. This evening we have
I don't think your
Sarah Tomaszewicz, who's going to
microphone's not on. Oh, okay, that must be burnt out.
Well, that may be why.
All right. Can you hear? Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's much better. Thank you, Katie. So tonight we have Sarah Tomaszewicz, who's our Director of Food Services and Nutrition, and she's going to give a little bit of a presentation about what she feels we need to do with food prices for this next year.
Yes, well, thank you for having me. So we haven't increased our meal prices for the last few years because, as you all know, our meals have been free, which has been a wonderful program for our kiddos in the district. But unfortunately, that program is disappearing because we are transitioning back to normal. So our hope is to increase our meal prices to keep up with not only the fact that we haven't done an increase, and in general, normal prices increase every single year, but also food prices, the cost of supplies, everything is going up quite significantly right now. So without increasing our meal prices, it's going to be hard for us to balance our budget at the end of the year. Now, last year, we were very fortunate because of the increase in reimbursement from DPI USDA to have a very positive fund balance at the end of the year, which is reflective of the positive or the increased reimbursement, but also the fact that we had a lot of staffing issues last year. So I think one of our days we had 10 vacancies, and a lot of that was unpaid leave. So my staffing costs were slightly decreased last year, and hopefully that's not the case moving forward, that we can actually staff our buildings so that we don't have district office staff stepping in, throwing hairnets on for us, which is always nice, but not their job. So yes, our proposal is to increase 15 cents for our lunch program to help offset those costs so that we can continue to upgrade equipment as necessary, as well as provide healthy and good food for our kids.
So just a little bit of background for the board. Food service is a standalone business entity within our books. So they are not taxpayer supported other than through state reimbursement and federal reimbursement for different programmings based on the number of meals that they serve. So having an increased revenue allows them to not only pay for the additional cost, but also help pay for our staff.
Okay, do we have any clarifying questions for Sarah?
So in reading through this, I was trying to see where and what costs we would be looking at charging our reduced price students, because that's a big concern for with inflation and everything.
Yes. So free and reduced is not set by us. So free is free, and then reduced is 30 cents for breakfast and 40 cents for lunch, and that is federally mandated, so that will not change. Yeah,
But
thanks.
Didn't we get, wasn't there something that passed this last year, or last week?
Okay, so I misspoke because at the last second that was taken out, so no, never mind.
There was a bill that was actually approved last week when President Biden got back from his trip, and we had thought there was a clause in there that might have made reduced free, but apparently that was removed.
Yes, it was the only thing that was removed before it was passed. So it was like very last second.
Okay, any other clarifying questions?
Do you have a additional need for staffing this year or a reduced need for staffing this year?
An increased need. So last year we spent a lot of time getting back to normal, opening up lines that we didn't have access to before, such as our salad bar line and such, because we were able to lift some of our precautions due to COVID. So I do have an increased need for staffing to bring even more of those lines back, to get back to more variety that we had pre-COVID. Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Can you speak to maybe how our pricing compares with other school districts?
Yeah, so I did a comparison with many of the Dane County, and we're within a few cents, plus or minus, depending on the district.
Go ahead, Troy.
Financial question probably for you, Andy. If our expenditures in our food service fund were to exceed our revenues, does that come out of Fund 10 then?
If the fund balance is completely depleted, yes. If our expenditures exceed our revenues, then Fund 10 has to do a transfer to get it to zero. And that actually happened to us in the first year of the pandemic, when we continued to provide food to people, but weren't charging any money. We did go through our entire fund balance at that point in time. We were able to, for the most part, reestablish that fund balance, just a little bit less than that after the end of last year. But with the federal program this year, we really have almost doubled that fund balance from last year. So we're in a very healthy position. We have money in case we do have some equipment needs and those types of things. But really the idea is to get to a point where we're sustaining again without having the federal program paying for all the meals.
Sure. And, you know, 4.5, my calculation is about a 4.5% increase over last year, and understanding that that's an increase, the only increase over the past few years, that seems actually pretty reasonable compared to the inflationary costs.
In the past, we've tried to be between a nickel and a dime a year, and so if you take the nickel times 3, that's 15 cents, and that would be where we would be if we had increased pricing.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Mary. Did you have a question?
So in the document, it talks about a range of increases from 1 to 50. What's on the 50 end of those increases?
So some of the proteins, chicken, beef, have increased significantly more than some of the other products. I have been able to find alternatives that aren't quite as expensive as some of the increases were, without taking away some of the health benefits of it as well. But
all right. And so then Troy asked the first part of my question, but then I guess the second part of the question is how, and I know we don't have a crystal ball, given what the projections are for inflation, do we have any sense what the likelihood is that we would need to go to Fund 10 to get to rebalance?
I would not think so at the end of this year, based on the amount of fund balance that we have at the end of 21-22. We should be fine. Even if we don't hit our revenue equals expenditure because that fund balance exists, we should be fine.
I was talking about for next year.
Yes, for this next year. I would anticipate having that fund balance there gives us enough flexibility that we'd be able to talk again if our expenditures exceed our revenues for next year.
Okay, all right, awesome. Thank you.
Okay, I will entertain a motion to get something on the floor, and then we can have further discussion.
I'll move this.
All right, we have a motion from Mary. Is there a second?
A second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Further discussion? Go ahead, Heather.
I just have one question. Troy actually got me thinking about this. Can you speak a little bit to the overall goal of this fund, understanding that it is supporting food service and we don't want to go negative, but at the same time, we're not trying to have, can you talk a little bit just about what that strategy is around that fund?
Absolutely. I think we have a healthy balance now because of the federal program being in place. I think we're in a good spot in this fund simply because our fund balance in the past has been around 300,000. It's going to be in the high 500,000 this year now. If and as we transition back into more of a normal situation, we now have a little bit of a buffer. So to going back to Dr. Lakuta's problem or question, you know, if things don't work out well this year, then we'll have some opportunity to kind of reassess after 1 year of normal in place. So I think that's fine, but definitely the goal of the food service fund is not to make a profit every year. It's basically to be self-supporting, but also to have a little bit of flexibility in case equipment goes down or in case a worldwide pandemic hits and you want to continue to provide food for folks.
Any additional questions? Sarah, can you please talk about, I know because this will be a change where families will need to fill out the paperwork for free and reduced
Yes.
lunch. So for people that are listening or, you know, as media covers this, can you kind of talk about how we're going to go ahead and do a little additional work to get that information out to students?
Yes, so the free and reduced application was released to us last week, so I'm in the process of making it for the Oregon School District, adding our contact information and such. My goal is to have it out by the end of this week and also have the first direct certification run by the end of this week. So the direct certification program pre-qualifies students without an application, which actually is a majority of our qualifying free and reduced families, so they won't need to submit an application this year. I typically like to send out the letters before the application so they know if they need to fill out that application. So the goal is to have all of that ready by the end of this year. Additionally, those who had qualified for the 1920 school year for free and reduced meals never got kicked off in the 30-day carryover that typically happens. And so all families who had qualified 1920, 2021, and 21, 22, I will be, if they haven't qualified this year, I'll directly mail home an application for them so that it is right there for them that they can apply.
Thank you so much. That's really important, and we appreciate your extra work on
Yeah,
that, so thank
you're
you.
welcome.
Any other questions? Okay. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Dr. Lakuta?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz? Yes. Ms. Bijak?
Yes.
Ms. Garrison? Yes. Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 7-0. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to action item number 4, which is the, I think it's supposed to be 22, 23, 21, 22 budget adjustments.
it
Sorry,
is.
I caught myself.
That's okay.
All right, Andy, go ahead.
You bet. So just as Mr. Tanner talked about, kind of a pro forma item, this is very similar. This is something that doesn't necessarily make a tremendous amount of sense, but it is something that we do annually because if we don't do it, then we get a footnote in the audit and we don't like that. Essentially, basically, what happens if we exceed any expenditure functional area and we don't do a budget adjustment, which the Department of Public Instruction fully expects us to do this because they give us the entire month of July. Keep in mind, the book, the money is pretty much already spent. There's still some bills trickling in right now because we're only the second week of July. But for the most part, the majority of the funds are already spent. So doing these budget adjustments are not going to change our spending patterns or anything. All we're doing is basically trying to represent what was actually spent and not have a footnote in the budget. You do get the flavor for some of the things that have happened. There were some revenues that we didn't anticipate back in September and October that came in that we mention in here. In order to spend those revenues, we did have to increase our expenditure side. And they're usually grants and those types of things. We did have some unexpected revenues that came in. We were reimbursed a significant amount of money for unemployment compensation. That we didn't spend. We just basically, kind of our budget got better, right? The difference between revenue and expenses basically became smaller. So we will be in a better position than we anticipated we would have been had the budget happened exactly had we planned. So between those things, and then there were some situations that happened on the other side of the equation. For instance, in transportation, I've been talking a little bit in preparation for the 22-23 budget about the expenses related to diesel fuel and kind of our cost in that. And we did, in fact, have an impact there by over $200,000. Our transportation expenses were more than our revenue, or no, more than our budget, sorry. So that was directly attributed to those costs associated with that impact on diesel fuel. So with that, I'll entertain any questions that you may have.
Would somebody like to get a motion on the floor, and then we can ask discussion questions to Andy?
I'll make the motion to approve the revised 21-22 budget as presented in the packet.
Is there a second? All right, Tim with the second. Okay, opening the floor for questions for Mr. Wyland. Anyone? Okay. Okay, go ahead, Tim.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. So the Common School Fund is an allocation of funds that the state determines in January. So it's hard for us to budget it in the fall. And we have to spend to the dollar or we lose that money. The money is a revenue source that comes from the Land Trust Fund, essentially, from the state of Wisconsin. So there's a bunch of different revenues that come into it. But one of the most significant one is the thing called the State Trust Fund Loan Program, where basically the state lends funds to municipalities, school districts, that type of thing. And then the proceeds of that actually go back into the state coffers, and by law, those funds have to then be reallocated. And they're specifically for library purchases. So it's Common School Fund purchase. There is some technology component of that because the library also involves some technology components. But basically that amount will move based on how the state trust fund programs were running, as well as some other fees and fines that I think are kind of combined for that purpose.
Does it ever go negative?
No, because what we do is we anticipate that it's going to be about $100,000 every year, and it usually jumps around between 120, 130. So we just tell our library coordinator, Mark Lee, we say, you got 100,000. Let's plan on that in September. Make all your books based on all the libraries based on that amount of money. And then when the Common School Funds comes out, and they're all looking for it, they're tuned into that. They get it on their listserv. Then whatever the difference is, we come back and say, okay, it's 122. You got an extra 22,000 this year. Now you got 5 months to spend it. You bet.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, we'll be revisiting the budget here in a little bit that relates to this agenda item, but I will ask Katie to call the roll.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak? Yes. Ms. Garrison? Yes. Dr. Lakuta?
Yes.
Ms. Wright? Yes. Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 7-0. Thank you, Andy.
Bet.
Moving on to open enrollment, I will turn it over to Ms. Jonan.
Thank you. So if you'll remember, by state statute, the board has to approve the number of spaces it will set for the next school year in January. So the board did do that on January 24th. So state law does allow that after, I believe it's the first Friday in June, that if you have families that are waitlisted, that you can open more space, assuming you have the space for those waitlisted families. And so this is the time of year where we watch things really closely because we certainly want to accommodate families if we can. And we also need to make sure that fiscally and class size wise that we're not having more students attend and having to open up additional sections that we don't have enough funding for. So it's a very careful balance that we do. And so we usually do this in June. We wanted to take a little more time and study just to make sure we were comfortable that we had space for students who were waitlisted. And so in working with our 4K partners and looking at different schools where we place students, we have a recommendation that we'd like the board to open some more spaces, particularly in 4K. We feel we do have 10 families that were waitlisted. We know that that's potentially a commitment through graduation. So we just wanted to make sure we were comfortable with that. But we are comfortable that we have space should those 10 families decide to enroll. And so we would ask the board to open 10 additional spaces at 4K. Our 4K partners do have space for them, and and then we do have flexibility after 4K as to the places that those students are placed, if they want to stay with us from kindergarten and beyond. And then looking at the rest of our sections, we would recommend opening up 2 spaces in 3rd grade and 4th grade. That even with move-ins, we feel really comfortable that we can accommodate those families. We did have a handful of other families in 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, but given our move-in history and the fact that our middle school class sizes are high, that we wanted to be really careful. And so we didn't feel comfortable recommending opening space for those grades. moving forward. We also took a look at our caseload and for students who need special education programming, and we did not feel that just given the increased needs of our current students that our caseloads are full for students who need services. So we weren't able to recommend opening any additional spaces for those programs. So tonight we're here seeking approval to open additional space in 4K, 3rd and 4th grade. It does have an immediate budget impact for us as well, because should those students enroll, we do get additional funding for those students. They're not in that 3-year rolling average. And so it could mean an additional almost $83,000 in revenue should they all attend. It's probably unlikely that all of them would choose to attend at this point in July, but if the board approves this, we would be making those calls tomorrow to see if they were interested.
Okay, is that rain and wind or both? All right, are there any clarifying questions for Gina before someone puts a motion on the floor? Go ahead, Mary.
So the middle school, you mentioned that our class sizes are relatively large. How do they compare to neighboring schools of our size?
Yeah, well, and it really depends on the course and what is being offered, and then what the students are interested in and where they are. So, for example, we may have like students in Math 7 and in Math 8, right? And so maybe Math 8 might have, let's say, 28 students, and Math 7 have 24 students, but it's not as though you can flip the students, right? Because they're not flexible in terms of math. So I would say, and I haven't looked at this since COVID, but in the past, our middle school numbers have been a little bit higher than our counterparts, but again, looking at the sections. So like STEAM is very popular, always more than 30 in those sections. But, you know, as you can imagine, it's hard to find one teacher for one section per day. So sometimes it's a function of staffing, where we might have other classes where we, you know, try to stay within that 25 student range. If you go back and look at the second report for our April meeting, or the second meeting in April, we had the staffing and we had all of those class sizes on there, so you can see the range depending on the class.
Thank you. Go ahead, Heather.
Gina, just one quick question. Should the board approve this, especially as it relates to 4K, but I guess also for 3rd and 4th, are the families notified once they're through with 4K, which elementary school they would be admitted to, or how does that work now that Forest Edge is open? I know that changed a little bit.
So once they enroll for 4K, then they are automatically accepted for kindergarten. So they would be placed in kindergarten the similar way that resident students would be placed. And I believe this year it's an early August notification. I'm looking at Katie. Yes. For kindergarten placement. This year, is it early August? Yeah, so about that timeline.
Go ahead, Anna.
Quick question on the enrollment number for the 4K. How confident are we with that number as far as families that have either already enrolled or registered their child to start 4K? I guess I'm just looking for the confidence level in that 190 number, given it's quite a bit less than the typical class size starting at kindergarten.
So those are confirmed enrollments. We do have a number of students that we have reached out to that we hope will enroll but haven't completed the process yet. So that 190 is confirmed enrollment. I'm very confident that that will increase. And Laura is working very hard, our registrar, to reach out to families to make sure that it's really helpful if they enroll in advance. Then the earlier, the better. But I will admit, I wouldn't have known that had I not worked for a school district. So we also understand that, you know, some families get to mid-August, even later August, and then it's more on their mind. So we do have enrollments throughout the summer. But we're making a very concerted push right now for kindergarten and 4K students that live within our boundaries.
So do they have an approximate number? I mean, if we're saying we feel confident with the 10, we must have an idea of how many more students we expect would be enrolled?
We do.
Okay.
I'm sorry, we look historically at how many students we've had for 4K, and we leave ourselves a cushion for move-in too.
Okay.
So we would not come to the board asking for more spaces if we felt like our class sizes were going to be too high for our residents. And adding Mariposa as a partner really helped as well, because those were additional sections that we can then offer for families.
Right. Thank you.
And that's a really important point that I think sometimes gets lost, is that we are making sure that we leave room for all resident students, and this is additional space after resident students have been accounted for, and it's a revenue source for us. So to make sure we can keep our class sizes low and what we need to do to afford our budget. All right, I will entertain a motion if someone would like to put that on the floor. All right, is there a second? All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion or questions for Gina or Andy? Okay, hearing none. Katie, could you please call the roll?
Ms. Garrison? Yes. Ms. Wright? Yes. Ms. Bijak? Yes. Dr. Lakuta? Yes. Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz? Yes. Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries 7-0. Okay, moving on to our last action item, which is funding options for the operational budget. And I believe Mr. Weiland is going to take it from here.
You betcha. So we've been talking about this topic for a little while now. Wanted to kind of go through some slides that you've seen before. We know that the most important thing in our educational program is the teacher in the classroom. There's great research that has shown that over and over again. And after the teacher in the classroom, the administrator in the building, the student principal, or the principal of the building is the second most important thing. That's what research shows us. We have a challenge in front of us. We've been talking about it a little bit. And the challenge is twofold. One is that we have a lack of state funding. And the second part of that is that we have a continuing challenge to continue to retain and attract staff within the district, especially in this environment with the CPI and the inflation is going up so high. So we also know that the state of Wisconsin has not been doing so good as far as providing the resources for local school districts. We were 11th in 2002, 11% above in per student spending for the United States, but we've fallen down to 25th. This information is actually just verified last week by the Wisconsin Policy Forum, which is a nonpartisan group that looks at policy issues within the state of Wisconsin. They used to be kind of called the Wisconsin Taxpayer Alliance, but got reformulated into the Wisconsin Policy Forum. So they've verified that. There's information on their website if people are interested in looking at it. That's one of the largest drops of any state in this time period. And then that's coupled with, that's before actually the increase of 0 per pupil spending for 21-22 and 22-23. So we've already dropped that far, and that's before there was the actions of the legislature in this last biennial budget where they gave us no additional funding. So how does that translate to our staff? Well, the first thing you have to understand is we're a staff-driven organization. 80% of our operating budget is composed of staff, both salary and benefits. And so we thought we'd put a number to that because we really haven't done that in the past. But that's approximately $49 million. So it's significant. 90% of our revenue is determined by the state of Wisconsin. It's composed of both property taxes and state aid, but the state of Wisconsin determines that amount of money that we can levy. So that's not within our control, unfortunately. Even though it would appear to be, it's really not. We can only levy up to a certain dollar amount. How much is that? Well, that 90% is approximately $55 million of our budget. I will say that the remaining 10% is really determined for the most part by the federal budget. And so again, that's not something we have control over. And then you add 0 additional funds per student for the next year, and then you include the year from last year. So for 2 different fiscal years, there's 0 additional funding that we're allowed from the state of Wisconsin. Sorry, it's not working. There we go. So one of the things that people may ask, and I would even ask if I were out listening to this, is what's different? Schools are always kind of saying that they don't have enough funding, that type of thing. And you know, there are times when we do say that, but this is significantly different. The magnitude of the problem is significantly different. And this chart, which was actually replicated by the Wisconsin Policy Forum in a publication a month or 2 ago, shows that. It shows the per pupil additional funding that we have each year since since 2012, 2013 until 21, 22, and it correlates that to the CPI. And you can see that on the left side of the chart, it's following fairly closely. It's not too far apart. It's kind of mirroring it. Some years the CPI is a little bit above, some years it's a little bit below, until we get to 21, 22. There's a significant difference there between 0 additional per pupil spending and a CPI that's just under 5% that we know of at that point in time. What does that translate into? Well, if you just take our budget and you take that 4.7% difference between the 0 and 4.7, that translates into almost $3 million or $2.9 million in 1 year. That's significant. So we have a situation where 21-22, the CPI was 1.23%. We got 0 additional funding. 22-23, the number that the Wisconsin Employment Relations Commission certified as a number that we can negotiate, 4.7%, we got 0. The way the CPI is trending right now, and that's determined on a calendar basis for us, so we only have basically 5 data points. We'll be getting our 6th one probably sometime this week, but based on 5 data points, we are anticipating that CPI number will be somewhere between 6.23 and 8%. That's not even factored into, the $2.9 million that I mentioned before. Obviously, 4.7 is $2.9 million. This number is going to be larger than that. The bottom line is, if we wish to continue offering the highest quality education and service to our kids, if we wish to have the best teacher in every classroom, if we wish to compete with local other school districts around the area, we have to basically find additional funding. We have an extremely competitive market in the Madison area. And by offering competitive salaries to our staff, we will be able to keep that best teacher in our classroom. So what has Oregon School District done to date? We have saved funds as we've kind of gone through the pandemic, and used them strategically to try to deal with COVID-related expenses. We've been in the process of restructuring debt service, trying to save money any way we can there. We've been reviewing our programs and budgets. I'll give you a for instance, and this is something that we do all the time. For instance, we were reviewing our insurance program a month or 2 ago and getting preparation for the July 1st renewal. We increased our deductible from $5,000 to $10,000 in order to basically save, I think it was around $15,000. What's interesting there is we basically got the premium that we had last year, because the premium was going to go up if we didn't do that. So we are constantly looking at those things. One of the most difficult things that we do to save money is look at health insurance, because it impacts the lives of our staff members, all of our staff members who have insurance, but that's a majority of them. And so we actually changed health insurance starting July 1, about a week and a half ago, to a different carrier. We saved a couple % on the renewal, but we also got stability for the next 3 years after this year. So we got a 4-year deal, and we know what our costs will be as far as our premium increases for that period of time. So that was something that was really, really difficult, but something that we felt we needed to do in order to control costs as best we could.
This weather is a metaphor. Have you noticed?
Is that what's going on?
The wind, and the rain, and the dark clouds.
Yes. So, and then the other thing that we're in the process of doing is seeking community input and sharing the story with folks. And I think there's going to be some information coming out real soon where we're going to be able to provide opportunities for community to engage and talk about this further. So what are other districts doing about addressing this challenge? Well, some of them are using one-time funds for operations, and that works for a while. I don't everybody has to do what they need to do, and everybody has a different situation in their school district. But eventually the bill's going to come due. And if you have one-time funds, eventually that's not going to work for you. So I have been talking about that. I would assume that there's going to be 420 referendums eventually in this state. I don't know when they're all going to happen, but they're going to happen because there's just no way out of the situation that we are all in. Some are reducing services and staff. Some would be increasing class sizes. And then some are seeking operational funds through referendums. That's really the only opportunity communities have to take charge of this situation. As of about a half an hour ago, the Verona School District voted to go to a $19 million operating referendum. Middleton Cross Plains is heading toward $24.9 million. So this is a significant issue. That is a multi-year solution for those districts. I don't, off the top of my head, I don't know how many years. I think 4 or 5 in those cases. But they are looking for long-term solutions to a problem that honestly wasn't created by the school district. So what our recommendation from an administrative point of view is to continue our community conversations, continue to gather input from our district constituents and inform them of where we are, continue to explore options, and then our hope is to present some additional options to the school board on August 8th. Krista, do you wanna?
Yeah, so what I'd like to do is first, based on the presentation, there was some new information in there, so I want to make sure people have an opportunity to ask clarifying questions before Andy goes back to what the district administration is formally asking us to do this evening, and then we could get a motion on the floor. But first, I want to give people an opportunity to ask any clarifying questions or make any statements related to what was in the presentation. So I'll open the floor. Go ahead, Leslie.
So I'm hoping this is clarifying. Just if it's not, just tell me. So this is more for Gina. And I'm hoping that maybe you can talk to us a little bit, because you've been with the district a chunk of time. Maybe talk to us a little bit about what you've seen with hiring this year as opposed to in previous years when we haven't had this cap on our budget to be so tight. Have you had issues, or how have we been able to manage to get where we need to be?
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. So this is my 11th hiring season in the district. And so we have been really a destination district even before I was here. And that tradition has continued, meaning that it has been very difficult to get a job here if you were just out of college. We had, a lot of our teachers came from other districts who wanted to be here. And so this year is the first year that I have felt that we're more challenged than we have been in the past. So for example, I always keep track of, in terms of retention, do we lose staff for a reason that meaning the district, can control? So for example, wonderful teacher whose husband gets a job in Pennsylvania, right? Like I try to talk them into staying with us and not their family, but no one ever takes me up on that offer. So I say that I lose people for love. So either their significant other gets relocated, or they have a baby and they decide to stay home with their baby. And I haven't won that battle yet either. But I mean, that's not something that I can compete with, right? But if I have an English teacher in middle school and that person goes to Middleton to teach English, then I feel as though that is something I could control. And so, looking at that prior to this year, really less than 1% turnover rate for area districts in terms of keeping the best educator in every classroom. So if we lost teachers, we lost them because of love, or because they might want a position that we don't have. So for example, they want to be an instructional coach and we don't have that position open here for them. And so this year is the first year where we have lost now 2 teachers to different positions in different area school districts, where I have felt that salary has been the motivating factor for them to leave. And we also have lost candidates that I have made job offers to because they've had other offers in neighboring districts that have been higher. And just had another one on Friday where we, had an exceptional teacher in another district, and I mean, she was $8,000 higher. And so I do want to reassure people that I do stay very true to our salary schedule and our rates for our hourly staff, because I I don't think it's fair to our staff who have been here if new people make more. So we stay with our schedule, we stay with our internal comparables, it's called, for our hourly staff. This is also the first year I've had significant difficulty in attracting and retaining paraprofessionals because of the hourly rate, that they can find a similar, if not higher, hourly rate in area businesses and other school districts. So really, really excited and proud of the hires that we have. And it's only been a handful so far, but it's just something that I get concerned about because we have such a short hiring season in education. So I really appreciate the opportunity to continue to have the conversations with the board and the community.
And then just to follow up with that, with the amount that you have left to hire, do you foresee there being a problem with getting to that point with the pool that you're looking at?
You know, I think we continue to be a destination district because if we've had candidates turn us down, we've been able to hire another, fantastic candidate. And so I feel really confident with that. I do get concerned when other districts are doing, looking for ways to increase their funding resources about being able to continue to compete moving forward. And I would say we tend to do most of our paraprofessional and food service hiring in August. Because we've just found if we do a lot in June, then they, take other offers during the summer. And so I am very concerned about our ability. Just for example, if anyone's out there interested, we have 4 paraprofessional positions at the middle school in special education, and we don't have any applicants yet. So, at this time of year, that starts to be really concerning. And when we do a $50 referral bonus for employees who refer people to us. And when I talked to one of our other paraprofessionals this morning in summer school, she said, I'm really trying to recruit, but that hourly wage is really tough. And I said, I know, and we know that, right? But we also have a budget that's really tough and want to be fair to folks like her who already work here.
I think, Tim, you were next.
Andy, you mentioned that Verona and Middleton have passed recommendations to go to referendum. They haven't passed referendums. They've passed.
Correct. And my understanding, I know for a fact Verona just voted a little bit ago. My understanding is Middleton has as well.
And you mentioned 19 and almost $25 million. I'm assuming that's over a period of time. So for instance, $25 million over 5 years is $5 million per year. Just to clarify.
It might be loaded differently, but
sure,
you've got the concept.
But there's a finite amount of time, a finite amount of dollars.
Correct.
Okay. That's all I have for right now.
Just as a follow-up to Tim's question, I think it's important that people understand the two-pronged problem we have here. So can you talk about that a little bit? It's funding, but it's also what Gina talked about. So when I hear that they're going to referendum, can you talk about the position that puts us in as a district?
Yeah. Simply, if their referendum passes, then they will have the ability to change their salary structure in order to compensate for those increases in the consumer price index and be able to be more competitive than what we would be. So the issues that Gina's having now would probably become much more significant in trying to retain staff if they can go to other districts and get significantly more money from the local area.
Okay, thank you. I think that's just a clarifying point to your good question. Yeah, go ahead.
Just using these two as a benchmark, based on their annual budgets, how much of a percentage of their annual budget is that? If you don't know, no problem. We will find out, but
I think that'd be best to save.
Okay.
I don't want to come up with an idea.
Yeah, no problem.
Yep.
Thank you.
Stay tuned for the second part of this discussion. All right, Mary, go ahead.
So I have a follow-up to Leslie's question for you, Gina. And I know that we as a board voted to, rather than raising our educators' base pay, we used the one-time funds that we had because we had $0 increase from the state to give them a stipend. So you are trying to compete against school districts who, in some cases, went ahead and raised the base salary. Is that right?
Yeah, so It seems it's twofold. Yes, that's one piece of it. And then another piece of it is other districts have implemented the 4.7% increase July 1. Whereas, we haven't made any decision, and I completely understand, as Andy talked about, those districts are in either, different positions or different communities. But when teachers are comparing that, that's also difficult, right? If the 4.7 is in effect there and not here. I would also say too that I have had, I have a lot of conversations about it's not just about the financial picture, right? That it's also like we are just an outstanding place to work, in my humble opinion. And I have things that I talk about our culture and our community, about why people come here. So I also know it's not just the financial piece, but if you are looking at, $5,000 to $10,000 difference, those are just harder conversations for me to have. And when you're looking at a number like 4.7%, we start to get into pretty significant monetary differences.
In looking at some of our neighboring school districts, I also noticed that Monona Grove approved a budget with a known deficit of like $770,000. And it seems that Sun Prairie is also likely pursuing a referendum. And I know that, let's see, sorry. Can you clarify for me, Andy, the referendum that, if you're aware, the Verona and the Middleton Cross Plains, they're non-recurring, or they are? Or do you not know?
I do know.
Okay.
I've talked to somebody in Middleton last week, and they are pursuing a non-reoccurring referendum for several years. There is some thinking that non-reoccurring may sell better to communities. However, you do then risk the chance of having to go back and getting permission again, and that number will continue to grow. Verona did do a recurring.
So then 19 million would be recurring.
Correct.
Okay.
And in reality, it's a distinction that's huge, but not huge, because would Middleton down the road come back and say, well, we have $25 million worth of reoccurring expenses, and when our non-reoccurring is done, we're just going to not spend that money? They're going to come back at the end and have to ask for additional funds after that and have to get reauthorization.
Right. Okay. And I know we talked last time about the fact that the state has a $1.3 billion.
It's actually worse than that,
Oh, is it?
or better than that, I guess, depending on your perception. It's $3.8 billion.
3.8.
Yes. So, and that is billion with a B.
Yes. And they've chosen not to invest it in our public school system.
Or in any expenses at all. The governor has asked twice, called special session to look at specifically education, and both times my understanding is the legislature gavelled in and within a minute gavelled out.
So what would happen if we did something similar to Monona Grove? And I'm asking you to use your crystal ball again, and how does that work?
Your fund balance will start to decrease. You'll have to start short-term borrowing, depending on how much fund balance you have. And the other component of it is if you are looking at if you are a growing district, the other thing that will happen is if your fund balance is decreasing, is your borrowing costs will go up. The rating agencies will come in and look at you and see that you, I don't want to say this, but the fiscal discipline would be a situation there where they're saying you're not living within your means, so therefore we don't have as much trust in you. The bondholders that are going to borrow you money would feel that would be a more risky investment on their part, and so they would ask for a premium, additional interest rate in order to compensate for that. So those are kind of the reactions, and eventually you don't have a fund balance, right? And it will compound very quickly based on the types of numbers we're talking about. So, and then to be honest, I'm not aware of a school district in Wisconsin that has gone totally bankrupt, but that potentially could happen. I know in other states there have been districts that have had that happen. And then typically what happens is the State Board of Education takes over the school district.
One last question, and that is, I know that early on in our conversations, probably right around the new year, there was some sense that the state legislature was committing to kind of backfilling the 0% increases of the 2 years of the biennial budget. But what's the current?
There hasn't been anything said in that nature. We did hear those rumors kind of at the beginning of the biennial budget that there would be. Nobody put a number on that at all. I'm hesitant to look at my crystal ball on that, but if their intent is to do that, they could do that. They could do that now. There's nothing stopping them. So, but they haven't done that. So I'm fearful that that would not happen.
Thank you. Go ahead, Anna. A couple more questions, and then Andy can present the recommendation.
Yeah, I'm thinking back to when we looked at our staffing plan for the upcoming year, and my recollection is that even without taking into account any sort of cost of living increase for teachers or any sort of raise type discussion, we were going to be short operationally by $1 million just as a starting point. So fiscally, we've got an issue just to keep our schools running without any acknowledgement of wages for teachers and staff and educators. So I guess I was hoping you could maybe speak to that a little bit more as far as where we are.
It depends on what you include in the number, but last we looked at it, it was actually around a $400,000 hole. And then if we were to advance our teachers on the schedule that we have, that would take it closer to a $700,000 hole. So that's kind of where we are right now before we provide any increase for 21-22, because remember it was just a stipend, so no base building for any staff members from last year for the 1.23% or any additional increase except for the step for those employees. And there's a few people that are on the step. We have very limited numbers of steps on our teachers' compensation system. Except for those folks, nobody would get any additional salary increase.
And then secondly, we did add staff through that staffing plan, and that all utilized one-time funds, correct?
Yeah,
so that
correct.
is not reflected in what we were anticipating operationally as our short-term positions we are looking to fill to deal with some of the issues some of the things that we want to handle related to the COVID.
Correct. There were pandemic-related expenses and positions that we approved. We knew that those positions would last until the funding is gone. But basically, by the end of this next year, the majority of the funding would be gone, paying for those positions.
Okay. Those are my only questions. Thank you.
Any other clarifying questions? Go ahead, Tim.
Andy, do you think we obviously received ESSER funds, 1, 2, and 3 funds over the last couple of years for a variety of things? Are we confident we're at the end of that story? We hear we're at
as far
the
as
end of
additional ESSER funding.
Yeah, we hear we're at the end of it from a food service perspective. Is that?
I'm definitely getting strong signals from the federal government that there doesn't seem to be additional funding. Significant funding coming our way. Mm-hmm. I think there might be little programs that might come out for different things, but from what I'm reading, the tea leaves, I do not see additional funding coming in any significant form.
And with regards to those ESSER funds, from what I understand, there are districts around the state who receive significantly more ESSER funds for a variety of reasons.
Actually, the main reason is Title I students. So those students that qualify for poverty situations, they got significantly more money. So to give I use this example, and it's not perfect, but you'll get an idea of the magnitude. We received about $1,000 per student, a little bit over that, $1,200. There are some districts in the state that receive $12,000 per student. So their problem can be delayed a little bit because they have a significant more allocation than districts such as Oregon.
And is there the sense that those districts, districts getting significantly more, have saved those monies that'll carry them through the next couple of years' budgets until there's a realization at the state legislature that we need to start that machine
I
running
definitely
again?
think that is some of the thinking that's out there from some of those school districts. Absolutely. Yeah, you know, in some situations, for instance, Madison, my understanding is, you know, they are just, they're having such staffing problems that, you know, that they weren't able to spend their budget this last year, and they get the additional ESSER funding. So you combine those two revenue streams, and they'll have some time in order to kind of work that through. Now, there are situations a little bit more complicated because they also had a referendum that was passed right before the pandemic hit. And so they are also at the same times where they're having all these one-time funds and their population is decreasing. They are losing students, and that's having an impact. So they've got a lot of different moving parts in their world.
Sure.
So, but definitely that is a thought process that's out there for some school districts.
At the university level, without question, many universities have endowment funds for a variety of reasons. Building funds, scholarship funds, other operating funds. Is there any state law that precludes us from having, maybe not for this urgent situation, but for the future, is there any state law that precludes us from having some kind of a community education endowment fund?
Not to my knowledge. The question would be whether that's held by the school district or an external entity, that type of thing. But, you know, one thing is simply growing the fund balance.
Sure.
That would allow you to help. But the biggest problem there is the ability to invest is fairly restricted. You can't invest in typically stocks and those types of things.
Sure,
because
if
of the
it's
fear,
school district held.
If it's held by the district, right. If it's held by the third party, then there's a lot more
Sure.
flexibility with that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep.
Go ahead,
Can I,
Troy.
just follow up on Tim's first question there? So, you know, all along with our ESSER funds, we've always used them as they were intended by the federal government. So, Andy, do you and you may not know the answer, but I mean, do you anticipate some of these rural districts in Madison having to use those ESSER funds for purposes that were not necessarily intended by the federal government?
Yeah. So, I mean, when you get into intent, right, you have to look at what the intent verbally compared to the intent that's written down in the grants. So the intent verbally seemed to be deal with these types of situations, but there's a lot of flexibility in those funding because a lot of, you know, this is a national program. So the differences between how schools are funded throughout the United States and all that kind of stuff gave the flexibility of doing that. What our state legislature basically said is, we're not going to give you any additional funding, and instead we would like you to use that funding to work through your budget. So that feels like there's a word called shoot, I just lost it. But basically, where you substitute federal dollars for local dollars. Supplanting. Sorry, I had a brain lapse there. It's called supplanting, and typically it's not allowed. From a federal perspective, you can't substitute federal dollars for local dollars. That's essentially because of the situation with the pandemic and the emergency need of it. The federal government actually let that happen to some degree. And then the state said, well, basically we're just talking additional dollars, and so we're going to take advantage of that loophole, so to speak, and let you do that. So I don't, that definitely wasn't the intent, but there was some allowance to allow that to happen. The problem with it is, again, you have a one-time funding source with recurring expenses. You're going to pay the piper at some point in time. So if you want to pay the piper with a larger bill down the road, you can do that. Totally allowable. A lot of school districts might be making that decision, but I think they might regret it down the road.
Yeah, and not to say that we would even have had the options that some of these other districts have. If we got $1,200 per student and they're getting $12,000 per student, I mean, there's a huge disparity in the magnitude of those numbers.
And I think the legislators from the state maybe didn't take that into account.
Thank you.
Okay, Andy, do you want to walk us through the recommendation from the district administration?
You bet. So three-tiered recommendation. One is to continue our community conversations. And I think I mentioned before, I think Erica's going to be coming out with some postcards that we're going to be mailing to residents as a way for people to engage in this conversation. We're going to continue to explore options and gather information. And then the third part is to present the Board of Education some options on the August 8th board meeting.
So I think what board members have in front of them is basically what Andy talked about, but I think what we're looking for is a recommendation that the board directs the action so the administration can take that. And so you'll see in front of you, one is to look at education compensation options, including revenue needs, financial options, and sources. And then two, which is kind of what Gina talked to too, is about the educator environment, which includes really looking at surveys and things that we can do in addition to finances that make sure that we keep the best teacher in every classroom, and look at it from both angles. So I think what we're looking for from the board is to put it with that kind of motion on the floor, and then we can have further discussion. Go ahead, Tim.
I'd like to make that motion, a two-pronged approach, both based around the educator compensation piece, but the other piece as well, outside of compensation or in addition to compensation.
Okay.
So that we have a clear understanding, because we know that compensation isn't everything. It's important, very important, but it isn't everything. And so I think we want to look at both of those prongs.
Okay, so you're taking the language here from this one. Okay. Is there a second? All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion or statements anyone would like to make? Go ahead, Troy.
I'll go. Just kind of want to reiterate some of my thinking here. I believe I mentioned this one in the past, but just want to point out that we do have a policy, number 611, our financial policy that does require us to have a balanced budget every year. Kind of goes to Andy's discussion about fiscal discipline and what some other districts are choosing to do. Our bond rating, I think we're what, a AAA bond rated school district, AA bond rated school district that has served us.
Love to get there.
That has served us very well in the past. I can remember several conversations where that bond rating has really helped us. So just want to point out that policy exists, not to say that we can't change that policy, but it is a policy that we have long operated under. I also want to direct attention to the previous agenda item tonight, C1, where we set our priorities. Priority number 2 is to foster innovation and support high-quality teaching. These priorities were based on a multi-year visioning and strategic planning process that went back 2 to 3 years at least. And we know that, based on our long-standing community input, that the families in the Oregon School District really place a high importance on education and high quality education. So again, just want to draw attention to priority number 2 for our 3-year plan or our 3-year goals. One more thing, just to kind of help us understand the magnitude of this problem. Andy did the math for us and got us to essentially a $3 million hole in the budget, based on all of those factors. So if we were to just do some rough math, a teacher is roughly $100,000 per year if we look at salary and benefits. So that $3 million hole, that's 30 educators. And Andy, you mentioned one of the options is reducing services and staff. So that, just to help us understand the magnitude of that option, that's 30 educators. Administration is going to go to work and present us with some options, but I think cutting to that level of that magnitude of staff is pretty extreme, and I don't know that there's going to be a situation that you can come back to us with that being reasonable. So yeah, those are kind of the highlights of where I'm seeing things right now. We've talked about this for a long time, and very supportive of the recommendation.
All right, any other discussion? Go ahead, Anna.
Well, to sort of piggyback a little bit on what you were saying, Troy, I think from what we're learning when we get presentations is that the needs of our students are at an all-time high, both with wanting to have them perform academically, but also with mental health, with social emotional learning, and with all of the things that we're trying to accomplish in our schools. I just think there's no better time for us to be talking about how we can keep these wonderful teachers and educators in our schools and really recognize the good work that they're doing to support all of our students. And again, I think I would reiterate a similar comment that now is not the time for us to be looking at ways to cut back on the number of educators we have in our schools because it's just they're being asked to lift a lot. And I think asking teachers to lift more with less is the wrong direction for our students and the wrong direction for the community. So I definitely support this and hope to hear how we can support our teachers and our kids.
Any further discussion? Okay, I'll just share a couple of my thoughts. Number one, this is not a small problem. I've been on the board for 7 years and it's never been this dire. Andy has been in this district a long time. And so him presenting these as issues are important. Number two, in the state of Wisconsin, since it became a state in 1848, it's been the state's responsibility to fund public education. That has always been the responsibility of the state. The state has defaulted on that obligation to us. And that's important to know. And the problem with that is they also control 90% of our funding. So not only do we get funding from state budget, but they control what we can do with local taxpayer collections. So that's what makes this problem so dire for us, is that not only are we not getting enough funding that's keeping pace, but they're also controlling what we can do. So this is not a grant solution. This is not a bake sale, and I don't mean to make fun of that, or a spaghetti dinner. This is a bigger problem for us that we need recurring funds that are of a higher magnitude. And so that for me is why the district is coming with a recommendation that we will approve to have them go to work, because they have to think big and they have to think bold. And then as a board, we're going to have to make bold decisions based on what they come back to us. And that will happen at the August 8th meeting in terms of we will see those recommendations. And then as a board, if we want to go to referendum, we will need to make that decision by the end of August. So those are real things that are on the table for us right now. So that's one piece. The other piece is making sure that we can retain and attract teachers, because that's what makes this school district hum. And so I want the OEA to be listening and understand that we have heard you. We know how difficult your job is, so we're doing two things. We're looking at what we can pay, and we're also looking why you stay here and what's important to you. Those are the two things that we are asking the district administration to go back and come to us with. So this is a partnership with this community, with our staff, and this board. And so we're going to solve it together, but we've got to do some hard work, and then we look forward to seeing those things on August 8th, because education is very powerful in this community. People believe in it. They have for years. That's why we have our values. That's why we've passed referendums. And so we got to come to these solutions together. So we hope the community engages in the sessions with us, is honest with us, but also understands this is a magnitude of a problem that we haven't seen for a long time. So Katie, could you please call the roll?
Mr. LeBrun?
Yes.
Ms. Wright?
Yes.
Ms. Bijak? Yes. Ms. Garrison?
Yes.
Dr. Lakuta?
Yes.
Mr. Pankratz?
Yes.
Ms. Flanagan?
Yes, motion carries unanimously 7-0. Thank you, Andy, and we look forward to the meeting on the 8th. Okay, moving on to D, discussion items. That was a lot of action. Well done, everyone. All right, committee reports. Heather for policy.
Yep, our policy committee just met earlier this evening. So at the next board meeting, we will be bringing the employee handbook and policy 613 updates for board approval. And our next meeting is, we're looking at, I don't have the date, September, what is our first board meeting? 12th. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Heather. Troy, visioning.
Visioning, so we have not met since our last full board meeting, but we do have a meeting scheduled for tomorrow night, 5 p.m. And just note that that is going to be completely virtual. So the agenda has the Google Meet information to tune into that. Two agenda items, school finances and future planning communication timeline. And we're also going to hear from our community education department and hear how they align to our broader vision for the district.
Great. Thank you, Troy. All right, moving on to E, information items, vision and strategic planning update, teaching and learning update, and superintendent's report. So I believe Mr. Tanner is going to step in.
All right, I have the light. Thank you. All right, as we talk about the strategic planning coming up, we thought it would be good to continue to bring this graphic forward and remind everybody about the strategic planning framework that was adopted by the board and how that fits in with what we're doing. So over on the right side on the bar, we have a strategic planning calendar, and one of the parts that we're in right now is the admin team workshop and planning that happened earlier this summer and is going to continue to happen in conjunction with the board. We also, want to draw your attention to the portrait of a graduate that was adopted earlier this summer, and that we're continuing to work with community and with the board on the action plans to make this work, to pursue that portrait of a graduate. And one of the ways we're doing that is through getting a lot of input and feedback. This is something that this board typically does quite a bit through visioning conferences regularly with the community. And right now we're doing a whole lot of gathering input and feedback. A number of you were at actually almost everybody I think was at the community focus group that happened last week. And as was mentioned earlier, we have quite a few of those coming up in the very near future too that we'll be inviting people to. So as we gather that feedback, then we make decisions about it, and it's all aimed at having the portrait of a graduate so that we are fulfilling the community's mission to educate our children so that they are successful in life. The new graphic is coming. We see the banner there. So
The board will see it at our next meeting,
there'll be
so get ready.
Yes, an unveiling. I think the drum roll. That's good. Thanks, Heather. So that's that. Teaching and learning update. Moving on. This is fairly. We don't have a lot of teaching and learning happening as in traditional, but we just got AP scores that happened. So we have a large number of students. We had 313 students who took 570 AP tests in 16 different subject areas this year. The number of subject areas continues to grow. And that's actually the highest number we've had in the last 4 years too. So we're increasing the participation rate. We're increasing the number of areas that it can be, because we have things like music theory and computer science. So it's not just sort of those core academics that we had. And we're pleased to say that 78% scored a 3 or higher, which is considered the passing rate. And 12 of the 16 areas exceeded the state averages. 14 of the 16 exceeded national averages. So we're doing well. And so that's good. So the average for everybody was like a 3.5 or something like that, but which, you average enough together and you get kind of a weird number. But anyway, it's great because this not only provides students with expertise in those areas, this is also one of those only areas, because I was asked like a year and a half or 2 years ago, like, how can we tell what the impact of the pandemic is? This is one of the rare areas where we actually have a national comparison. These results are not normed, but they are something that we can compare against. So this was kind of interesting for us. We just got them last week. So far, there's no real trends. Some have gone up, some have gone down. Some are vary by year, and some vary by content area. But we're going to dive into this with the high school and try to look for any root causes of either the successes that we've had or some of the areas that we can improve, and take a look. So it's exciting to get the data because it's one of those things that we've been looking for as sort of a standard yardstick we can use to compare ourselves to other districts and to the state and the nation. So that's exciting. There we go. And then superintendent's report. So summer semester is in full swing, which is really fun, and it was a blast. It still is. It was last week when we launched. It has been, I would say, by far the smoothest launch that we have had, which is really outstanding. The people who are organizing it have done a great job. And just, I think every administrator that I can think of was there on that first day to help make it go really smoothly.
We have 2,250 students enrolled in some sort of summer learning this summer. That includes swimming lessons, which is quite a few. But I mean, there are students, K-12 who are here doing learning over the summer, and that represents 6,223 actually enrolled classes. So most of them are not just one class. There is a veritable plethora of classes to be taken during summer school. And one thing that was added too, you can see in the top left of this picture, we have a bunch of people wearing blue shirts. Our student interns, we're trying to really elevate that role. We've had them for a long time, but this year they got special shirts. They got an orientation the night before, and they were welcoming students into the building, which is great. So they've been really helpful with guiding students to their classes in the morning, helping them, helping in the classes, and helping transition everybody. So that's really been great. In addition to offering a wide variety of classes for all ages, they also offer free breakfast and lunch and transportation to and from summer semester. So it has been really a great thing. And here's another awesome congratulations. Congratulations to Anna Martin. She just graduated as a senior, and she won the National Award for High Schoolers for the German Embassy National Essay Contest, which is really amazing that she was the national award winner. Students chose one of 3 topics to discuss, either Brothers Grimm fairy tales, the Marshall Plan, or the Congress Bundestag Youth Exchange. So Anna's essay was on the success of the Marshall Plan after World War II, and it received first place, grades 9 through 12 nationwide. So congratulations to her. And another student actually received an honorable mention. So Allison Langto was an honorable mention student. So pretty amazing. And of course, this has really been fun. The Big Orange Chair Summer Challenge. We have a hashtag and everything for it. So people are taking pictures on the chair, and they are sending us photos. So if you don't know, this is sort of like a thing. You can do it. So you can go take your picture and then post it and do the hashtag Big Orange Chair. But it started because this chair was actually created by our own students in Chris Prahl's shop classes, and it was a gift from the class of 2022. So it's sort of that gift that the class gives back. And so people walking by just started taking photos of it. And I was gonna, but my kids told me not to because it was during graduation and they'd be embarrassed, but I still might. And then send them to, so they're doing this little Facebook thing. So if you want to snap a picture of yourself or somebody else in the chair, you can send it to socialmedia@oregonsd.org, and they'll publish your photo. And the chair is going to stay out there throughout the summer, and then probably go inside during the winter and maybe, have recur in future summers. So that's just a fun thing. And that's it.
All right, great. Thank you, John. Well done. Thanks. Okay, closing. Future agenda. Next meeting is August 8th. We will have some action items from the policy committee, and then the majority of the meeting will be spent reviewing the recommendations that come and the options that we have before us as a first glance from district administration. All right, moving on to checkout. I'll go around the horn. Mary, anything? I don't think so. Thank you. Heather.
I just wanted to reiterate the summer semester slide. My kids are in the summer semester, and I'm so grateful for all the teachers and the support staff and admin and the high school interns are doing it. Such positive feedback, not only from my kids, but also just from chatting with other families, and the breadth of classes and the experiences and the fun and just the inspirational love of learning. Not to mention maybe helping not have a summer slide, but also just on the very positive, just interest in learning and all the different things that that kids and families are able to do is just really wonderful. So I wanted to give a big shout out to everybody who's involved in that, because that is an undertaking.
Troy. Leslie.
So Heather kind of stole my thunder, but everything she said, thank you so much for everybody who's worked on summer school. My kids have loved it so much. And I will tell you, I am so jealous, because if they had had something like this when I was going to school, I would have been in school year round. Because it's really awesome, some of the courses and stuff they've offered to take, and some of the ways that we've been able to keep our kids engaged, and to see all the smiling faces when you do come up and drop off your kids, and how excited they've been to be there with their friends and to be actually learning and being in school in the middle of summer. So thank you all.
Anna, Tim. I just have one thing. It hit the news today that Becky Blank, who was the most recent chancellor of UW-Madison, has been diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. And so I've had the good fortune to spend some time with her, and she's a big supporter of public education. So I think it's important that we wish her a speedy recovery and wish her well in her treatment. So I just want to make sure we had an opportunity to say that. So other than that, we are now going to move into a closed session as a board. So we will convene in 5 minutes at 8 o'clock. Thank you.